trunk, I open up, I sold my soul a good price.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Nerd Talk podcast by thedigitalworm.com. I'm your host, Matt, and I'm here with my good buddy and co-host, John. John, say hello.
What's going on, everybody?
So what we do here on the show is we take 10 of the most interesting topics we found in nerd culture in the past week, and we just discuss and have a good time. That's what the podcast is all about. John, you're going to take the lead on the first two topics of the day. These are two topics you wanted to talk about quite a bit. I thought we could probably start with the public domain stuff. You seem to be really passionate about that one, and then we can do the second one after that, if that works for you, or we can do DC first. Okay. Well, go ahead whenever you're ready, sir.
Sure, yeah. So basically, the way this works, as far as copyright law goes, is you create something, and it's yours. But it's only yours for a specific period of time.
Which it's essentially a lifetime that it belongs to you, is how it works out.
At this point, it's a publication date plus 70 years. So it's as if work was a person. And if you die, it goes to a family member or whoever you will it to, something like that. This time frame has changed multiple times over the years. The reason why interesting right now is that for the past 20 years, nothing has gone into the public domain, and that is because the original tune Steamboat Willie was slated to go into the public domain, and Disney, as Disney does, flip their shit, their lawyers, and tied things up in litigation. And once the dust cleared throughout the entire 90s, is something called the Sonny Bono Copyright Act, which basically stopped anything from going into the public domain until here, so a couple of days ago, and started with anything in 1923 that would qualify for the public domain. A year after this, forever or until they change the laws again, which is always possible, worth of material will become public domain. So next year, 1924, then 25, and so on. And the public domain is, it's just like it sounds. You can use it now. You can characters for your own work. You can publish already. Let's say you're writing you're editing an anthology, and there's a certain story from 1923 that you feel like would fit the tone of what you're doing. Now you can just use it. You don't have to pay anybody. If you want to make a film based on a piece of literature that was originally published in that date, you can do remakes, anything you want. Something that in the value of things being in the public domain, the Oz stuff, anything from the Wizard of Oz that is from the original L. Frank Baum books has been in the public domain for about 25 years now, which is why you see a bunch of comic books, TV shows, movies with imagery and stuff from Oz, because nobody actually owns that stuff. With the exception of, to most people, is if you look at the original Wizard of Oz, you got the ruby slippers. Well, that actually, the shoes and the books were silver, but the original film, it was one of the first Technicolor films. They wanted to show off their technology, so they made ruby because the red pops buried in silver. Beyond that, anything from the original Oz stuff has been that way for. What's interesting for the stuff in 23 is that there's some more H.P. Lovecraft stuff that becomes public domain that never was. Kind of come through. There's going to be more and more stuff that people are going to care more about. There's going to be more interesting stuff from the late 20s, early 30s. Within a couple of years, it's going to get really interesting.
I agree. This is really it's a really interesting development. I had no idea that this whole thing was on hold because of Disney for so long, which seems pretty crazy to me.
Absolutely, yeah. They're you know how they are about and being litigious about their intellectual properties. Well, apparently, when that date of anyone be able to do anything they want with it, they just went full force, and that's what we got. We got 20 years of nothing going into the under the previous public domain laws. Right now, we would have things from the mid to late 40s going into the public domain. Really interesting creation, honestly.
Yeah, it's really neat. I'm glad you brought this to my attention because I mean, we've been I know I have, and I know you've been helping me out a little bit here and there with the whole fair use thing, like what is fair use and what is not, and it's fucking scary because I don't really have a whole lot. I'm not trying to get sued for what I do have and go into debt because I owe a ridiculous amount of money for using something I think is fair use, but isn't. Like it's a big deal. Like people get sued for this shit all the time.
Right.
Or at the very least they get a cease and desist and they have to take down a certain piece of content for whatever reason. And it's a brutal world out there, and it's not like I can afford an entertainment lawyer at the moment, so I can't go and be like, hey, what is this? Can I use it? Can I not use it? So really interesting development.
Absolutely. Last week, I mentioned that I had purchased a year membership of DC Universe, and I've spent the last week kind of digging into what they've got, most of which has been spent watching the first 9 out of the 11 episodes of Titans, and I really can't say enough good about this show. The casting could have been better. The pacing of the show is really good. You get to see the darkness of and the bleakness of at Earth. I mean, things that the interactions that would never kind of looking at each other angrily in the real world can fist fight in this show, and that really shows off. And you have to have that suspension of disbelief going into anything from comic books, of course, but that really shows off the bleakness of how people are in the DC universe. This is really how these comic books have been written forever. To me, a parallel, if you look at the movies of Quentin Tarantino, you've got a kind of an alternate. And that's true in DC, and it's very true in Titans. And it comes out in a very one thing in my opinion is DC, their movies seem to have this weird relationship with music. They like to their music a little louder than most soundtracks and a little more prominent, and their music choices are kind of interesting and don't always seem to make sense at the time. Well, this is true of Titans as well. I think it adds to the show as opposed to taking away from it. But you got anything from the Foo Fighters to random disco tunes, LCD sound system, and for some reason 2 or 3 times you hear AC/DC through this.
Yeah, I noticed that as well.
It's weird, and it's not something I would choose, but it works really well for the show and what they're doing. They've added in a bunch of cameo appearances from other heroes and villains throughout DC's history. I'm not going to go into that because I don't like to spoil things for people, but it's definitely a worthwhile show. In my opinion, the 75 for the year is worth just this show and what Doom Patrol seems like it's going to be. Everything above that to me is kind of icing on the cake. Comics on the service, but then you look at the actual issues and what they're doing is actually really a heavily curated list of shows and movies of DC, and you get these inside stories of all these characters that they're not going to be able to very well in the medium of television. You've got 40 years worth of comics to draw on, and so for for it to be like Marvel Unlimited, which is just, hey, here's 40 years worth of comics, do what you want with it. This is not ever what DC is going to have. This is never going to be there. But learning more about the backgrounds and histories of the on these shows and in these movies, then I think you're going to find a lot of value there. Available shows and movies, and full of the better animated films for the past 10 years are there. By Gaslight's there, a bunch of really good stuff, and I definitely suggest anyone who likes DC stuff at all, anyone's interested in learning more about that stuff, it's a good purchase for sure.
I like the fact that, you know, I know there's a Marvel version of the comic thing as well, but the fact that, you know, kids can't walk down to their local comic shop and buy these old books for, you know, $2 or $3. Like, these old books, like, they go for hundreds of dollars on eBay. Like, that this youngest generation of comic book readers just simply doesn't have access unless they have, you know, the DC or Marvel counterpart to be able to go in there and use the digital reader to read these great stories. And I think that's a big deal for me, being able to go back and, you know, I can read Green Lantern #1 and #2, and, you know, different things like that. You know, things that would cost a small fortune to be able to read today. That's a big deal to me, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. There's definitely value in that.
As far as the show Titans goes, I'm not as far along as John is, but the show is definitely very, very good. I think it's above par with what we see DC doing on the CW. I definitely think it's above par there because it's their own show. There's a lot more they're able to do there. It's definitely an R-rated show for sure. So if you think you're going to watch Titans and you're going to get something you would see on CW, that's simply not the case. There is language. The word fuck is used at least 5-6 times an episode, maybe more on some occasions. And there's definitely some other adult themes. There's quite a bit of gore, lots of violence. It's everything an adult would want in a Teen Titans live action show. They definitely went above and beyond here, but, you know, don't get shit twisted. Like, this is not a CW show, so you can't go in there with the mindset it's going to be anything like Arrow or Flash, because it's just it's darker, it's dirtier, and it's grittier.
Yep.
And so, yeah, I have to say, like, if you're looking for a quality streaming / comic service, I think this is an amazing service that DC is currently offering. Highly recommend. So we're going to move on to topic number 3 today. And we're actually going to stay in the comics universe, but we're going to switch it up a little bit. So I'm sure a lot of you nerds out there, just like John and I have been, but we've been wondering when X-Men is going to make a splash in the MCU. And according to Kevin Feige, it looks like they're going to start doing some planning and some thinking as early as this summer. According to a quote I found on Cinema Blend, he said, we've been told it's looking very, very good and could happen in the first 6 months of next year. The notion of the characters coming back is great. It's nice when a company that created all these characters can have access to all those characters. It's unusual not to, but in terms of actually thinking about it and actually planning things, we haven't started that yet. So they're really serious about getting the X-Men involved into the MCU, which I think is going to be huge. It's going to add a completely new layer to what they've already been doing here. Because, you know, in the comics, the X-Men and the Avengers, you know, they traded off a lot of characters. Saw Wolverine and Spider-Man both in the Avengers, I think at the same time, right?
I mean, I don't know that Spider-Man was ever a real Avengers member. I mean, he was maybe Avengers Auxiliary or something, but the real Avengers back and forth has always been Beast. One that
really
has always, yeah, he more than anyone else has gone back and forth between X-Men and Avengers. He's been very important to runs of both of those books.
Well, as far as the MCU is concerned, he has become a staple in the newest version of the X-Men movies. Ever since their kind of sort of reboot where they went back in time or whatever, he's been huge in those movies. I think he's been one of the better characters in Days of Future Past and X-Men First Class specifically. So I think integrating him into the MCU's in various forms could probably be a good way for them to do it. Wolverine is the most iconic character probably in the X-Men. So they're likely going to go there. Plus, they have to find somebody to play the guy. I'm not sure. What do you think they're going to do? Any speculation?
I don't know, man. I just don't want more origin stories. I don't want to reboot. I think that it would be very easy to integrate these into each other. I mean, it would work well based on how the comics often do things. I mean, the X-Men often have and have always had multi-issue, multi-book arcs that infect the entire world, but don't really affect. It can be the same in the movies as well. You just start adding characters that happen to be mutants, and they have their own backstories, and everything is fine.
Yeah, I agree.
As long as that's how they do that, I don't really care how the rest of it goes. There's plenty of people that would be good Wolverine candidates. I don't think that you necessarily have to immediately add Wolverine. I think that we're not going to immediately see Wolverine. He will eventually show up. But it's hard for these guys to cast them probably because there's kind of a bar set,
and it's a pretty tall fucking bar.
One thing is I'm interested in is how these last two regular X-Men films are going to go and what direction they're going to go in.
Dark Phoenix looks pretty terrible from the trailers I've seen. I don't know if you've seen.
I haven't seen any trailers at all, but it's a great old school X-Men, and there's a lot of potential for it to be very good. Now, I have seen a trailer for New Mutants, and I'm frustrated that it's taken as long as it has to release because that trailer came out over a year ago, and New Mutants seems to be a horror film.
I think that's what they're going for. Yeah.
Very much looking forward to that film.
Yeah, I hope it's good.
The trailer looked awesome.
Fox is, in my opinion, Fox could have done a lot better with their X-Men movies. There were a couple of them that stand out as rewatchable, but a lot of them were just kind of one and dones. Like I could take them or leave them, which the Disney has done the exact opposite with the MCU, and they've created films that are rewatchable several times, in my opinion.
I feel that the only bad X-Men movie was X-Men 3, and everything else I've watched at least 2 times. I don't often rewatch media. It's almost a never thing for me. And I think that with the exception of X-Men 3, which I barely watched a single time, I've watched everything else twice and feel that it was worth it.
That's fair. It's coming, and I'm happy about it. And I know you're kind of hopefully optimistic about it.
I have a reserved optimism.
Yeah, but either way, it's coming. I hope they do what you hope they do. We'll see. So we're gonna go ahead and move on to the next topic here. This is a current affairs piece I found off a Gizmodo article. New Delhi's air quality is so bad the government is enlisting firefighters to help fight it. These images that I'm seeing off of this post are pretty disgusting. The air quality in New Delhi is just horrid. It goes on a scale to 500, I believe, like the rating system, and scores of over 300 indicate a pollution level that is hazardous to human health. And the score for New Delhi is over 500, and the scale only goes to 500. John, what do you think about this pollution issue in New Delhi. Like, do you think these images are just the worst of the worst, or what do you think? Like, I'm
I think
wondering.
that this probably what we're seeing is normal stuff. What you're seeing there is what would have happened to New York and Los Angeles if the EPA hadn't stepped up in the 70s. That is not a part of the world that is known for caring about not only the environment but the health of their people. It's not a part of the world that a lot of environmental safety is in place. I think people need to look at what's happening in places like that and in parts of China now and ask themselves how terrible of idea is it really that here in the States they're trying to roll back EPA protections at the moment and have been rolling back EPA protections. This is where we're going to be. Trump continues to get his way. It's a scary fucking thing. I feel for the people of parts of that part of the world who, has a government that gives zero fucks about them. Greedy corporations are able to pollute as much as they want, and there's no consequences.
Well, I think it's kind of bizarre that they think these firefighters are going to be able to do a whole lot with this plan. Like, what they want them to do is go on to high-rise buildings and essentially just hose the air. Like, I don't know what they think spraying a water hose out into the open air is really going to do. It sounds like bullshit to me.
It's posturing. It's so they can say they tried something. Nearest thing that I can tell. Water plus smog doesn't mean less smog. It doesn't work that way. It just means that dirty water is going to fall on your head if you happen to be under that specific part of the. That's it.
Yeah, like this seems like a completely out of control situation.
No, you need air purifiers and to shut down all those plants that don't have on them. That's the only thing that's going to save that place.
Yeah, they need to take drastic steps, and according to this article, it says the government finalized the National Clean Air Program. The strategy sets targets to reduce air pollution by 20 to 30% by 2024. That really doesn't sound like it's good enough. I
mean, I guess you could call it a start, but it doesn't sound like much to me.
We're gonna move on to our next order of business if it's cool with you.
Definitely.
All right, so we've reported on what's going on in China, different things that just seem kind of crazy to both of us. This is the latest I saw on what they're doing over there. They're keeping tabs on kids with quote-unquote intelligent uniforms. So essentially, they're tracking children. This is about as close as China has gotten to actually jamming chips into people's skin. The uniforms are what's the word I'm looking for, John? Like, there's no way out of this. Like, it's connected to each student via facial recognition software, so there's no way for you to play hooky. And
yeah, well, the thing of it is, man, like, I mean, it's using RFID chips because that's the most versatile way of doing things like this. So you just got scanners set up in certain intervals in certain places, and as you cross, it hits either a positive response or a negative response, and you just keep going. And they say that it's to make sure these kids don't get stolen or don't skip school or do these other things.
Yeah. But
research. This is what this is.
Yeah, it's clearly not like. Sure, I mean, I get it. It's probably doing what they say it's doing, but that's not its true intention. Like, they're clearly working on something for the future to be able to track and monitor all of their citizens.
Absolutely. I mean, China is a place that if you work for a company, they own you. and they dictate where you live, they dictate who you're with, they dictate who you hang out around, and situation where that's the norm, creating a world where they also give you your clothes and they also track you based on your clothes and tell you where you can and cannot be at a given physical time based on that. That's just the next logical step for the type of control we're talking about.
It is a fucked up step. Like this,
it seems like every week we come up with something that's scarier and scarier from China. Like this is, in some of these places, and it's different provinces too. What's interesting is they've got these segmented going on concurrently in different areas, and if you look at them separately, you can take them as what they are, but when you look at them all together, between the social reporting, which is government incentivized narking on people, and then you take the smart suits where they know where you are all the time, and you add in a few other things, and realistically you're building a situation where the government knows where you are, who you're with, what you're doing at all times, where you can and cannot go.
Like this, when I read this article, the hair on the back of my neck kind of stood up. Like,
fair enough.
I don't know about you. Like, it's not that I was shocked. I was just like, oh my god, like this like bleak dystopian kind of future where the government controls everything you do and say, and like where you are and who you're with. Like, that's becoming like closer and closer to a reality for the Chinese people.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, my heart bleeds for them because that's fucked up. That's a shitty situation to be in.
Absolutely, man.
This article was of particular interest to me. When I first started the digitalworm.com, like I had this interesting goal. Like I kind of wanted to be the next Verge or the next Gizmodo. Like I thought I could just kind of build a media company slowly over time. However, it only took a couple of months for me to decide that was not the best course of action for the Digital Worm. Now we're focusing more on unique content, starting with my personal network, and then we'll branch out from there. And I saw this article today, and I was like, well, holy shit, that was well, I didn't see the article today, but the article was on TechCrunch 5 days ago. And it's talking about how these media organizations, several of which I pull content from to make this very podcast, are not doing so hot. Let's see here. Vox Media laid off around 50 people. Gizmodo cut its staff. Defy Media shut down. Some other media places shut down. Like, things are rough all over. And I personally think that, these kinds of media websites with just quick blurbs of current affairs and news are kind of a thing of the past. Like, I don't think they're future proof at all, and I think we're going to continue to kind of see this downward spiral for them. For a long time, they relied on ad support, and more and more people every day are getting ad blockers. So they're these companies aren't bringing in the revenue they once were. John, do you have any opinion on digital media and what we're seeing with all these layoffs?
To be honest, man, if you really look at it, this businesses in every realm, businesses come and go in waves, and that's just the natural effect of modern pseudo capitalism. That was what we deal with on a day-to-day basis. When it comes to tech, it seems like it's got about a things crest and then they trough out, and it's just a normal thing. This feels like a normal part of the business cycle to me. To be honest with you, 3/4 of the companies that's listed here, I've never fucking heard of before. I know who, Vice and Vox are. I know who Gizmodo is. What's if I had to guess, I'm assuming that means that they are the larger ones of. Realistically, these seem to be things that kind of relied on each other for content coming back and forth. And there was a lot of kind of cannibalism and information in that, and so it seems logical and natural to me that once a few of them start to fail, they're going to take some more of them with it. So I mean, this is kind of, capitalist Darwinism in action. And I think that the ones that stay will be stronger for it, and then a couple months to 16 months from now, whole new wave of something that's slightly different is going to come along. The rest ago, I've been on ad blocker for, theoretically, 2 years, long fucking time, because I don't want to see ads for things that I don't care about. If you're on the internet, if you're on the internet, you know what you're looking for. You don't care about. This isn't television, and until they start treating things differently than they treat television, these types of things are going to continue to happen.
That's very well put, John. And I really like the point you made that this is kind of a normal thing. Like, it comes in waves, and so we got to focus on. I mean, not when I say we, I mean like the digitalworm.com specifically, as well as other media sites, really need to focus on the future. Like, what does the future look like? Like, what do we want it to look like? I'm very happy I made the decision to not be another cookie cutter media site. I think we're going to start seeing more and more focus. Actually, I honestly don't know. Now that I think about it, I really don't know. Like, I would like to see more unique content creators out there, but as far as news and the kind of content that a lot of these websites are producing, I don't know what that's going to turn into. And I mean, it's interesting to see what it will turn into, but it seems like the sites that are focusing on creating just unique content for a certain niche or audience seems like they're doing the best out of everybody. So I'm going to keep an eye on this because it's rang pretty close to home for me. Not just
makes sense, man.
Yeah, I mean, not just because I look at these sites for content to be able to do our podcast, but also because I'm curious to see what it all turns into. I'm just kind of a nerd like that. So back to Hollywood we go. Zombieland 2 is a go, and for those of you who saw that movie and enjoyed it, you remember a scene or a series of scenes with Bill Murray playing himself. He survived the zombie apocalypse and would dress up as a zombie to like go to the grocery store and shit and try to blend in with the other zombies. It was a really funny series of scenes that was in the movie, and it really kind of stole the show, I guess you could say. Bill Murray had some great one-liners, and apparently in the sequel they're going to be bringing him back, and they're going to be bringing Dan Aykroyd into the mix along with him. I'm a huge Dan Aykroyd fan. I was a huge fan of all the movies that Aykroyd and Harold Ramis and Bill Murray made back in the 80s and early 90s. I thought they were just hilarious and awesome. And I really like seeing that Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd are going to be joining the cast for Zombieland 2. John, do you have any thoughts here?
No, man. I did not know this was happening. I think it's a pretty great thing. I'm super stoked about it. The first film, you can't not like Bill Murray. The guy's just one of the most likable dudes ever. Yeah, and I definitely would watch that.
Yeah, I'm pretty pumped because I really liked the first movie. It was a slightly different take on zombie movies because zombies are fairly played out at this point, and it was just different enough to make it interesting and funny. So I look forward to seeing the sequel. Plus, it has a great cast. Woody Harrelson and Emma Stone and Jesse Eisenberg, I think his name is. Is that how you pronounce his last name?
Yeah.
Yeah, I like all those actors. Should be a fun movie. So
Absolutely.
Moving on to our next story. This is something I'm hoping John can talk quite a bit about. I found this article on Cinema Blend, and it was titled 5 DC Stories James Wan Should Adapt into a Horror Film. So James Wan is the director of Aquaman, but he's most widely known as being a writer, director, and producer for horror films, and some of these horror films are really, really well known. He was connected to Saw, Insidious, a few other big hits as far as the horror genre goes. And then the author went on to list some of the works he would like to see James Wan turn into a horror version in the film world. Some of them, I think, actually are pretty cool ideas. One thing that caught my two caught my eye more than most. One was the Blackest Night series, and the other one was Swamp Thing. John, do you think these could work as horror films? And what would you like to see as far as DC horror movies? You know, we covered the Brightburn trailer a few weeks ago, and we were both pretty excited about that and seeing an unofficial horror version of a famous DC comic character. I'm going to let you go ahead and take over from here.
Well, honestly, a few of those I think are a little too niche. I think that what we're going to see, it's almost impossible that the Swamp Thing show does not cover that Swamp Thing story they're talking about.
Do you think the Swamp Thing show is going to be more horror than anything else, or do you think it's just going to be kind of that dark kind of theme we've been seeing so far with Titans?
I think it may have a horror aspect to it a little bit. I wouldn't be surprised. The comic book stuff tends to blend a lot of different things at once. And nothing's ever going to be a strict horror film in any of these things. It's just never going to happen.
That's fair.
But I think that it's likely that we see some horror elements in the Swamp Thing show. I think it's likely that we see Constantine in the Swamp Thing show.
Wait, hold up. You're going to have to back up for a second and break that down for me, because, you know, Constantine is one of my favorite DC characters. What's his connection to Swamp Thing?
Well, he was created within the pages of Alan Moore's Swamp Thing run.
Oh, interesting. I did not know that.
Yeah, he's a spinoff. He just was popular enough that he did his own show, did his own book, and it happened to last a very, very fucking long time. There are tons of Constantine arcs that you can make into horror films. Like, I mean, you could spend a decade making horror films out of Constantine stuff, and really good stories at that. The idea of making any one DC thing into a horror film, I think is kind of selling short. What I would like to see, and if this dude was interested in being the director / creator / executive producer of this idea, I think that it would work a lot better. Been multiple iterations of a book called House of Mystery and another one called House of Secrets throughout the history of DC Comics, and they are horror anthologies with bookends, like, you know how Tales from the Crypt has the bookend of the Crypt Keeper. Well, these books had the bookend of Cain and Abel, like the brothers Cain and Abel, which you see in the 90s in the Sandman books. Cain is always killing Abel, bringing him back from the dead. They're immortal, and they are the keepers of the House of Secrets and the House of Mystery, and crazy, horrible things happen within the house and about the house. And I think that what would be better than a film, in my opinion, would be a horror anthology show, probably through DC Universe, probably not a mainstream television thing, based on characters as bumpers going through and telling all these, maybe even some of the old school horror stories from those books. You could bring in and use those. All the way back around to Swamp Thing is House of Mystery was the book that Swamp Thing originally appeared in.
I think you're probably right. But I also think that they're going to try to do something a little more horror-esque at some point as well. I feel like that's something they're probably interested in doing at some point. I mean, now that they have James Wan, who's it looks like he's going to be an executive producer for Swamp Thing, the show. So it wouldn't surprise me if at some point
Yeah, I'm
they
looking
decide.
forward to this show a lot. I think it's got a lot of potential.
I never read the books, honestly. Wasn't a huge DC guy growing up, so I'm way more into DC now as an adult than I ever was as a kid.
Yeah, those are definitely books that are, very worthwhile to go back into, and it's really really fucking good. Same is true of Hellblazer. Same is true of Sandman. All those early Vertigo books are really fucking worth it.
I'm I'm gonna blow your mind and possibly upset you. I actually own the first Sandman. It is in my car, has been for years. I read half of it and I just couldn't get into it. Like, I've really struggled to get into it, and I know that's probably upsetting you, and you're probably at a loss for words right now. But I just couldn't. Like, it just did not grab me.
I mean, some people just aren't Neil Gaiman people. I guess I don't know. I think it's one of the best comics that has ever been written.
Well, most people do. That's the thing.
But,
and you also know I'm a huge Neil Gaiman fan. So
true.
The fact that he had this like critically acclaimed like cult classic graphic novel, and it couldn't pull me in, I felt like an asshole. So this is the first time I've actually ever talked about this with anybody. Is that
I mean, how far into it did you try to go?
I don't remember. It was a few years ago. I actually bought it because I was so certain that I was going to love it.
Was it one of the trade paperbacks?
Yes.
Multiple issues together or something?
I'm not sure. I'll have to go dig it out of my car at some point, and I'll tell you about it.
Sure.
All right, I think we're ready to move on. You agree? All right, our next topic here, pretty short one. Just wanted to say that we saw the announcement for Stranger Things Season 3 arriving on Independence Day of this year. I'm pretty hyped. In my opinion, Stranger Things is probably going to be in my top 10 greatest shows of all time. John, are you I think you're a huge Stranger Things fan. I don't know if you rank it as high as I do on your personal list of greatest shows, but I'm ready for this. I've been ready for this for a while, and I'm super pumped.
I think that I need one more good season to really cement that show for me in that way. If we get one more, I'm in.
I remember when this show came out, and I'm way more into Netflix originals than a lot of my personal network is. And I remember watching the first couple episodes, and I was like, man, I don't know about this show. Like, I was like, I'll give it one more try. And then halfway through the third episode, like, they just got me, dude. Netflix got me good with that one, I gotta say.
Yeah, definitely. The casting is really good. The writing is really good. It's really hard not to like that show.
So, moving on to our last topic of the day. There's a new California law. I thought this was a pretty cute article, and a pretty cute law to go along with it. I really like seeing this kind of stuff. There's a new California law that pet stores can only sell rescue animals. I think this is fantastic. I had my dog from 2002 until I unfortunately had to have her euthanized just last year. You don't often see pit bulls living that long, but my dog lived a long and very happy life, and I can't imagine having lived all of those years without her by my side. She was an incredible animal, a great friend, and I miss my Sparrow deeply. Think about her all the time. And I think, laws like this, they're great. You see people selling these tiny little lap dogs for thousands of dollars, and there's tens of thousands of animals in rescue shelters that are looking for a good home. A lot of them have been have not been taken care of very well, and they've been treated like shit, and these animals deserve better. And I'm really happy California started this law, and apparently the UK is also going to implement something really similar. John, what do you think about it?
Well, a big part of why you're seeing this stuff is the prevalence of puppy mills existing. There's a lot of people out there, and I purpose this with the fact that person is just not, it's not for me. But I understand that a lot of people feel like their lives are really enhanced by that stuff. So I definitely get the value of it in that particular um being, not being a pet person. Anyone who, you know, should go to prison forever. There's no reason for that. It's the same as, you know, animal cruelty shows deep-seated psychological issue that in my mind means you don't get to be around other people, because
I
it
actually agree.
always goes to worse things.
Yeah.
A problem with, so a lot of people don't realize dog breeds exists because of humans. Or people started looking at different features on these dogs and saying, I like these features but not that features, let's breed these animals to try to get to go in a certain way. A dog was just a dog, and there were differences, but realistically we created breeds. This is our fault, we did this to them. And there are certain breeds like Pomeranians, for example, a lot of them die really young because we've interbred them to the point where everything's inbred. Laws like this disincentivize people from continuing down those paths because they can no longer make $5,000 on the dog.
Yeah, it's one of the few
I have a hard
times.
time. I have a hard time with the idea that can, as your job, breed these animals and sell them for such a huge profit because you say this is what this dog is supposed to look like. I have a hard time grasping that people agree and pay this amount of money, for one thing. I mean, you people have entirely too much free fucking money on your hands. But realistically, there's another aspect of animal cruelty based into, you know, that part of it as well. And I would love to see it on a national level, this becoming a thing.
I agree. I feel like California made an anti-asshole law here, and you know, you don't really see, like, most of the time you see laws that benefit assholes, and I feel like this is one of those times where the state was just like, no, we're gonna punish you for being an asshole, and we're gonna reward people that are kind and want a pet, and you know, and are gonna go out and get a rescue animal. Because, you know, I don't think, I am no longer a pet person. Like, once my dog passed away, she was a huge part of my life. Like, I don't want another dog. I just don't want to have to deal with all that all over again. But I get it, because I was a dog person at one time, and my sister is super, just almost relies on her dog to be there for constant love and support, and so I understand. And, you know, this, I think it's awesome. It's just California's way of just saying, you know, fuck you, you're all a bunch of assholes. This is what you're going to do if you want a pet. And I dig it.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, well, that about wraps it up for today, guys. Thanks for hanging out on the Nerd Talk podcast, brought to you by thedigitalworm.com. I'm your host, Matt, and I'm here with my co-host, John, and I hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll see you next week.